Hello, my friends. Welcome back to Restricted Republic. Can't thank you enough for being here. My name is Justice Knight. Today, filling in for Lisa Haven back in this seat. I know it's nice to have her back, but this story alone, and one chart explains everything. And it's not what you've been being told. That's the entire deception behind the storyline itself. How did Biden ever get away with this? How did the neocons push him in this direction? Well, we're going to cover what one chart now discloses in great detail, because everything you're seeing in your geopolitical headlines, well, my friends, it all equals one outcome. And it is an outcome nobody wants, but yet the Biden administration and those that are helping to set this entire agenda have a one-track mind. And that one-track mind is focused on one outcome: war. And we're going to explain exactly what we mean by that. Now, before we get started, if you haven't subscribed to Lisa Haven's channel yet, what are you waiting for? Just click on that subscribe button. Help share this video far and wide. If you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, Lisa will put a link above. Can't tell you how much that means simply by clicking on that subscribe button. Also, and most importantly, Restricted Republic has suddenly taken on an overwhelming amount of new subscribers. Thank you for that. If you haven't joined us there yet, the one platform, no commercials, no interruptions, created to be that bastion of truth. And right now, that discount offer that Lisa put up is about to expire. Take advantage of it today. 2 for free. Again, that is the number 2 for free. It's going to get you 2 months absolutely free, plus a 14-day bonus. On top of that, absolutely free. That is restrictedrepublic.com. Come find out what thousands now know real news was meant to sound like. But now let's get back to this broadcast. Whoa, now, Joe. Why is that devilish grin on your face? Well, because you've had something planned from the very beginning, haven't you? It all relates to this one single chart. You've heard the storylines of China versus the U.S., U.S. versus China, but do you know what it actually means? Do you know why this chart is triggering the reaction we are now watching in world news from every country, not just us? Or as covert geopolitics called it, the one chart that explains everything. And we're going to explain what they mean by that headline. And it will go to explain all the headlines you've been seeing. Pelosi's defiant Taiwan trip cements her legacy on human rights, women, and China. Are we so sure that's how that title should have read? Or U.S. congressional delegation makes another surprise visit to Taiwan. Or this headline: China now condemns U.S. and Canada for sending warships through the Taiwan Strait. Why all these moves by the U.S.? U.S. presses Taiwan to buy weapons more suited to win against China. Or the U.S. is mulling joint production of weapons with Chinese Taipei. What direction are they heading? What eventuality are they trying to reach at a breakneck pace? Beijing doesn't want the U.S. to form an anti-China coalition, but that is what the U.S. is doing. This on the Financial Review. Washington favors Five Eyes over G7 to build anti-China coalition. And then there's the sanctions. U.S. imposes sweeping human rights sanctions on China, Myanmar, and North Korea. U.S. plans to impose sanctions on China's Hikvision. All the tech is under fire by the Biden administration, but it's been a well-orchestrated plan from the very beginning. As the West sanctions aim to cut off Russia from critical high-tech goods, well, now we start folding Russia into the equation. More specifically, about Russia and Ukraine. As these sanctions move on, as the Biden administration clamps down on China's access to chip technology, with the new crackdown, Biden wages global campaign on Chinese technology. Well, it is a global campaign. Even the New York Times not stating this is a U.S. campaign. No, there's something far larger. But they want to keep your attention on sanctions imposed on Russia. But the second half of that title is more accurate: hurt Chinese economy. Because it's no secret the Biden administration and Biden's national security strategy doubles down on the U.S.-China rivalry. To be more specific, the document recognizes that China is the only competitor with both the intent to reshape the international order and increasingly the economic, diplomatic, military, and technological power to do it. Well, the neocons in Washington deem that to be completely unacceptable, and they have made it Biden's #1 mission to assure that does not happen, because it would disrupt, as they stated again, it would disrupt the international order. And now we start to come into the keys of this story, and that one chart that explains everything, that chart that shows U.S. dominance is waning. And China has stepped in to disrupt everything that Biden and his administration, and as they stated, the international order, put NATO into that mix, didn't desire. They didn't want this eventuality. This changes their entire landscape. The chart above explains everything, not just the hostile diplomatic jabs that are designed to discredit and humiliate China, but also openly belligerent policies that are aimed at Russia as well. People need to understand this. They need to see what is really going on so they can put the events in the proper geopolitical context. And what is that context? But before we get there, this isn't to advocate for China in no way, shape, or form. But when you're dealing in this new geopolitical order, it is important to understand who the players are and what the outcome may be. A catastrophic outcome becomes more reality every day. Some would even say that the war has already started. So back to that context. And what context is that? The context of a third world war. A war that was thoroughly planned, instigated, and now being prosecuted, according to this author, by Washington and Washington's proxies. That's what's really going on. But all along, they've wanted you to keep your focus on the evil Putin, the one disrupting everything. How dare he? Washington capitals condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine, stand in full support of Russian players and their families. So the increasing violence in Ukraine and Asia are not the result, according again to this author, of Russian aggression or evil Putin. No, they are actualization of a sinister geopolitical strategy to quash China's meteoric rise and to preserve America's dominant role in the world order. Can there be any doubt about that? The author, pretty clean cut. Their answer is no. But it's more than that. You see, it's all about a map, or a globe in this case. Because if you've been watching what's going on and paying attention to NATO, you've noticed that there appears to be one country now surrounded. And that country is China. But there's one problem. It's the country above them that has prevented them from being completely encircled and cut off from this, as they called it, new international order. And that country is Russia. And if Russia was to extend its boundaries through Ukraine, you start to see that the lines between Europe and China continually get more cluttered up with the barricades of NATO, and hence why the administration has remained laser focused on assuring Russia does not take over Ukraine. So again, can there be any doubt about that? The author, as I declared, states no, none. This is why we are experiencing the redivision of the world into warring blocs. This is why we are seeing the rolling back of 30 years of globalization and massive supply line disruption. And this is why Europe has been thrust headlong into frigid darkness and forced deindustrialization. Even the Financial Times doesn't make any secret of this. Containing China is Biden's exclusive and explicit goal. And they go on to state in that article, again titled, Containing China is Biden's explicit goal. Imagine that a superpower declared war on a great power and nobody noticed. Joe Biden this month launched a full-blown economic war on China, all but committing the U.S. to stop its rise. And for the most part, Americans did not react because the story was focused on Ukraine and Russia, while Biden's sanctions grow and he cuts them off from the remainder of the world. So as the Financial Times states, one of the world's superpowers declared war on another superpower. But they did it with a whisper, a deception, a deceit, a sleight of hand. To be sure, there is Russia's war on Ukraine, and inflation at home to preoccupy attention. But history is likely to record Biden's move as the moment when the U.S.-China rivalry came out of the closet. Moreover, last week, a top Biden administration official indicated that the U.S. was preparing new bans on China in high-tech areas. Alan Estevez, the Undersecretary of Commerce for Industry and Security, said the U.S. would ban China from accessing quantum information science, biotechnology, artificial intelligence software, or advanced algorithms. But they've already been here collecting that. Now ejected from the U.S. allegedly. Will we end up doing something in those areas, he states? If I was a betting person, I would put money down on that. And China has never reacted favorably to that as we continue this isolation and control campaign. Will Biden's gamble work? A gamble with millions and millions and millions of lives at stake. I'm not relishing the prospect of finding out for better or worse. The world has changed with a whimper, not a bang. Let us hope it stays that way. As the author starts to conclude, quite an amazing article, because if you put it in context, German president arrives in Ukraine as tensions rise. You see, there is warring factions being set up. Taiwan tension raises alarms over risk to world subsea cables, but Taiwan in itself should remain one of the focuses. And it can all be tracked back to a fundamental shift in the global economy. China is growing stronger. It's on its path to overtake the United States economy within a decade. So here's one of the keys. As the world's biggest economy, China would now take over Asian control. And Asian control would mean it would be able to settle regional disputes in its own favor and to delegitimize U.S. regional and global leadership. It would then begin to cut off the U.S. from the global order. The order that this author is declaring the other G7, G20, NATO alliances are trying to establish. The U.S. has orientated its foreign policy around a rebalancing of forces. Strategy calls the pivot to Asia. Now remember that NATO map and you'll see how this all now plugs in so neatly. In short, the U.S. intends to be the dominant player in the world's most populous and prosperous region, Asia. The United States is not going to let this happen without a fight. Washington is not going to let China muscle it out of the markets that it plans to dominate. That's not going to happen. The United States will go to war to avoid a scenario in which the U.S. plays second fiddle to China. In fact, the foreign policy established has already decided that the U.S. will engage China militarily for that very objective. Are you starting to see how the Ukraine-Russian war has silenced a much larger story? Have you seen how the Ukraine conflict intensifies as progressives abandon diplomacy call is just one of many misdirections because it's not being put in the correct geopolitical framework and reference points. And when we see our food supply completely disrupted, when we see diesel going out of control, inflation skyrocketing, America has always had trouble focusing on more than one story at a time. And the neocons know this. They utilize it to keep your eye off the bouncing ball, rather declaring the trouble with nationalism, those that believe that they should protect their own country first and foremost, maybe even stay out of foreign conflict, protect the homeland. Do you see now why they've made that so evil? Because that is the anti-agenda against everything being propagated and perpetrated here. Everything it goes against. Now you start to understand why Trump has remained public enemy number one and why the great MAGA party, as they call it, this nationalist party, as they like to term it, and now you see why they use all those terms? I love this article. Dividing the world economy, economic decline. Do you really think Putin is losing? I really think the rhetoric is dangerous. People are ignoring that the world is dividing. This is creating a dangerous new Cold War that can easily turn very hot if Putin was losing and his position would be in jeopardy. then he would get much more aggressive. And who'd be behind him, pushing in that direction, who benefits from a disruption in this international order, as they call it? Well, according to this chart, it's China. And it's all economic. The origins of this conflict can be traced back to the seismic changes in the global economy, the rise of China, and the unavoidable decline of the United States. It is a case of one empire replacing another. And along with those changes will come more flashpoints, more devastation, and more looming prospects of nuclear war. And this is precisely how things are playing out, and you're watching that happen every day on your news. China's Ukraine response is all about the U.S., not Russia. It's being declared, but it's being shielded from you. Ukraine war, China comes in full support of Russia, calls for impartial investigation into biomilitary activities. All these headlines suddenly make sense. So many struggling to comprehend the connection between China and Russia, because China looked at that same map I showed you, and they know they're being surrounded in an effort to cut them off. And they're not going to allow that to happen. They're not going to allow themselves to be surrounded. And so they're supporting Russia, that big bloc country sitting right above them, that assures those lines into the EU can remain open. And that is the China factor in Russia's war in Ukraine. Or Washington's proxy war in Ukraine is actually aimed at China, not Russia. Russia is not a pure competitor, and Russia does not have the economic wherewithal to displace the United States in the global order. Nord Stream, however, did pose a significant risk to the U.S. by greatly strengthening Moscow's economic relations with the EU, and hence we had a problem. And particularly the Europeans' industrial powerhouse, Germany. And we know what happened to that pipeline now, don't we? Now, I hope this begins to fit everything very neatly for you into the geopolitical context it should remain. The Moscow-Berlin alliance, the Russia-German alliance, which was mutually beneficial and key to German prosperity, had to be sabotaged to prevent further economic integration that would have drawn the continents closer together in the world's biggest free trade zone, one of which China may very well have been a part of, and would have stopped the U.S., Washington, and NATO, and all their alliances from preventing this. Washington had to stop that in order to preserve its economic stranglehold on Europe and defend the dollar as the world's reserve currency. In essence, Washington sees Russia as an obstacle only to its pivot plan to encircle, isolate, and weaken China. But Russia is not the greatest threat to this U.S. global plan. That designation belongs to one country only, and that country is China. The Third World War is being waged to contain China, not Russia, according to this author. What the war in Ukraine suggests is that among foreign policy elites, there is a general agreement that the road to Beijing goes through Moscow. That appears to be the consensus view. In other words, U.S. power brokers wanted to weaken Russia in order to spread U.S. military bases across Asia. Ultimately, the military will be called upon to enforce Washington's economic rule over its new Asian subjects, if that day ever comes. And we must all hope that day never comes, and this plan fails. Because if it doesn't fail, we are looking at a level of destruction that has never been seen before. And so even the author, hoping and thinking that all this is extremely unlikely that Washington's ambitious plan will succeed, but we have no doubt that it will be implemented all the same. Tens of millions of people are likely to die in a desperate attempt to turn back the clock to the fleeting unipolar movement and the equally short-lived American century. It is a tragedy beyond comprehension that the mainstream media doesn't even whisper about, because they want you to remain blinded to the facts of one of the most important geopolitical maneuvers of our lifetimes. And one chart explains it all. There can be no China supremacy, would be a distinctly different opinion, as to how Washington's going about it and how we should be going about it. And the one Washington has chosen, well, has already engaged us, according to many, in a war that's already began. I hope that helps to put this in the correct perspective for you, a different perspective than what you've been hearing. We work hard here to assure we do that. Now, before we conclude, Lisa wanted me to give a shout out to her sponsor. That sponsor is NobleGoldInvestments.com, the leading gold and silver IRA company, a longtime sponsor of Lisa's, working with gold IRAs, working with silver IRAs, an amazing company. Now, for more information, they even put up their own YouTube channel. You can find that at Noble Gold Investments at YouTube. And right now, with every qualified gold and silver backed IRA, you get this amazing 3-ounce silver coin. Amazing sponsor, amazing company, an opportunity that we hope you'll go to, NobleGoldInvestments.com. And in conclusion, we bring you these facts so you can evaluate the maneuvers happening by Washington in the appropriate context. It's important that each and every one of you understand it's not always what it appears. And we love you all. Until next time, Godspeed and God bless. Justice Knight, signing out.